So I have to preface this review by saying there is a part of bias in my opinion that's not beholden to the show itself. But Tales of the Jedi makes me angry, in two different ways. The Tales of the Jedi comic book series that this show was inspired by are some of the greatest comic books in Star Wars history, and as a fan of them, this show has used the namesake of something iconic within the expanded universe and marketed it as something irrelevant to draw in old fans that recognise the name and the logo. And I know not everybody is going to agree with me here, but I think Tales of the Jedi is an insult to the legacy of that comic book series, and I also think it's a massive insult to one of the creators of that comic book series, Tom Veitch, who sadly passed away this year. Tom was responsible for creating something truly iconic. The entirety of the Old Republic, something that so many Star Wars fans adore, is the brainchild of this man. It all started with Tales of the Jedi. And there is not a single reference, not a single in memory of, not a single piece of recognition for what he did for Star Wars is mentioned anywhere in this show. Tales of the Jedi is a bastardization of what he created, and they couldn't even be bothered to memorialize his name in a show that should have been about the work that he and so many other people created. Tales of the Jedi was a perfect opportunity to honour the memory of Star Wars stories of old. It was a perfect opportunity to do something new in Star Wars and to bring to life a comic book in a brand new visual style, an animated style that does look beautiful, and I will give Tales of the Jedi that. It's a beautiful show to look at. But as soon as the credits rolled on the final episode, not a single mention was given to the creator of the thing that this show bastardizes. And I am so angry. And I cannot forgive this disgraceful level of disrespect. And I think the creators of this show, and Dave Filoni especially, should be ashamed of himself, because he has stolen the namesake and the brainchild of a man that has recently passed away. And then to stoop as low as not even to put the tiniest of things in the end credits, or maybe at the beginning of the show, saying in loving memory to the man who created the very thing you have stolen the title and the logo of. It is a fucking disgrace. And you know what? Despite that, I tried to go into this show open. Of course, I had my bias, I had my anger at the disrespect to the expanded universe and the creators of this comic book series, but I gave it a chance. And all I can say is this: while the show is beautiful to look at, and I will give credit where it's due in that regard, this has a kind of matte painted visual style and it's wonderful, and also the soundtrack is really, really good. You have 6 episodes of relatively boring Star Wars short stories, where in reality, only one of them was worth watching. Now, of course, because Dave Filoni is involved and he can't seem to leave Ahsoka Tano alone, it starts off with a story about Ahsoka Tano, and it was boring. Because of the short nature of the episodes, there's no development to anything that's happening. There's no substance to it. Ahsoka's mother takes baby Ahsoka on a hunt. Baby Ahsoka gets stolen by a wolf. Somehow baby Ahsoka manages to tame this vicious creature, who then returns baby Ahsoka to her village, and then the matriarch of the village says, "Ahsoka is Jedi." A bit of dialogue, by the way, that made me laugh because it was terrible. The end. We're in a part of the Star Wars universe we've not really seen before. We're in a Togruta village. We could have taken some time to really learn about their culture, about their way of life, and how they perceive the universe, but no. This description is essentially the fundamental reason why this show fails. It tries to tell extremely personal stories, but every episode is ridiculously short at like 15 minutes, and then every episode is also a separate story, so those personal moments feel unsatisfactory, they don't have any substance to them, and they don't feel connected. The second episode then commits the same sin as the first episode. It focuses on Count Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn, a relationship that we've never really seen explored in live action, and instead of doing something that was nuanced about these two characters, the episode ignores it to show us Count Dooku might be a little bit evil because he force choked someone. The end. There is tiny moments where the dialogue in this show does give some exposition and does show you a glimmer of that potential substance that it could have had if it was given the time, but it's just a repeating occurrence of every episode. Episode 3 is the exact same thing as Episode 2, literally the plot is identical, just with Mace Windu instead of Qui-Gon, and in the same way they have a glimmer of interest between Qui-Gon and Count Dooku in Episode 2, they do the same thing with Mace Windu and Count Dooku, about how these two characters differ and how their ideologies are split, but apart from the slight dialogue moments, there's no focus on it, and it feels pointless by the end. And then, Episode 4 is even worse in this regard, because this was such an important story for Count Dooku. This was the episode where he snaps, and ultimately becomes Darth Tyrannus. But there's absolutely no development for this moment. Count Dooku goes from being a decent bloke at the beginning to killing Yaddle in cold blood at the end, and there is, like I said, no substance between these two moments that make Count Dooku's fall to the dark side feel poignant. And also, to add to that, Yaddle's death was extremely anticlimactic, especially considering how heroic her death was in the expanded universe. Boo. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this review, I was angry for 2 reasons. And this is my second reason to be angry. Because if you are going to steal the namesake of something iconic, at least create something brilliant in its stead. And Tales of the Jedi is not in any way iconic. It is not particularly good, and this show, it shows moments of promise if they gave it 6 full episodes to developing one specific character or one specific personal story arc, which I think should have been about Count Dooku and Qui-Gon, about how his fall to the dark side occurred and whatnot. It could have been really good, but it is ultimately just a rushed anthology. There is really no reason to have Ahsoka in this show at all, and let's be honest, the only reason she is in this show is because a certain somebody leading the project can't seem to create anything without her presence. And by the way, I love Ahsoka. She is one of my favourite characters. In fact, the moment between her and Darth Vader on Malachor in Star Wars Rebels is one of my favourite things in Star Wars of all time. But I'm tired of her just being pushed into every single story that has any slight relevance to the prequels where she could appear, just because. Count Dooku should have been the focus, his relationship with Qui-Gon should have been a focus, his descent towards the dark side should have been the focus. And what we got was a rushed, unfulfilling Star Wars miniseries. And once they're done with Count Dooku in Episode 4, we then just jump back to Ahsoka, and then we have an episode where she's training with Anakin. Again, unnecessary when this 20 minutes could have been given to Count Dooku in his development, a character we don't have many stories about, unlike a certain Togruta, and a character who should have more stories because Count Dooku is awesome. And then the final episode is the same thing, rushed and unfulfilling. There's a small moment in the beginning where Ahsoka is at Padme's funeral. Yeah, it was nice to see and it's a good idea, but there's no real dive into Ahsoka's psyche at this moment, apart from one little bit of dialogue between her and Bail Organa. And then she sort of starts this episode by saying she doesn't want to fight anymore, she's done. Then she's working on a farm some years later, saves a girl from being killed in an accident with the Force, befriends the girl, her brother then outs her to the Empire, an Inquisitor shows up, destroys the farm, and gets killed within literally 2 seconds. All of this happens within about 6 minutes. The Inquisitor looks really cool. It's one of the coolest designs for a Star Wars character I've seen in a long time. He's dead straight away. And I mean 4 seconds maybe at best. No name, no development, no story, nothing. And then she just goes, actually no, you know what, I will get back to fighting. So an important, poignant character moment for Ahsoka Tano that should have been given attention to detail at a point in her life that really needed respect within the storytelling falls absolutely flat because there's no time given to it. And I do know people are going to love this show because there are flashy moments, it's beautiful to look at, I'll give it that, it has a lovely soundtrack, and all of the performances, by the way, are wonderful. My only gripe there is that they didn't have Samuel Jackson play Mace Windu when they had Liam Neeson play Qui-Gon. Sam Jackson loves Mace Windu, let the guy perform as the character. And there are glimmers of a show, of a story that could have been really good if it had some focus, if it had some direction, but once again, in reality it's just kind of another glorified Ahsoka is Wonderful story with a little bit of Count Dooku thrown in there, when in reality the truly interesting parts of Tales of the Jedi are Count Dooku, and it's the one story that doesn't get the attention to detail it needs, and ultimately the show feels pointless. So in conclusion, The people that made this show should be absolutely ashamed. There's not a single moment anywhere honouring the memory of the man that actually created the true Tales of the Jedi. And then to add insult to injury, they gloss over the Tales of the Jedi comics, something that was absolutely incredible and something that was pioneering in the Star Wars Expanded Universe, with a prequel story about Ahsoka and somewhat Count Dooku that, to be honest, is absolutely bang average. Now, I'm curious to know if you have seen Tales of the Jedi, and I'd like to know what you think of it. Like I said, I know there are going to be people who love this, and I'm curious to know if you are one of them. Let me know down in the comment section below. As always, if you enjoyed the review, don't forget to hit the like button, it helps me out a great deal. And if you haven't, perhaps consider subscribing to join the biggest growing Knights of the Old Republic community on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.